I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Ms. Johnson-Blanco, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 helped put an end to many of these abuses that you all testified to, but recently we've seen a renewed efforts to suppress votes through voter purges, poll closures, and other tactics. Our committee has been investigating many of these abuses. For example, in Georgia, the state purged more than 500,000 citizens from the voter rolls before the 2018 elections. In Texas, the state issued an advisory claiming erroneously that thousands of people had illegally voted and threatened these individuals with criminal prosecutions. And in Dodge City, Kansas, a majority Latino city, local officials moved the only polling place outside the city and gave the wrong address to some new voters. So my question to you, Mrs. Johnson-Blanco, what impact do these tactics have on minority communities?
In short, they keep...
You put on your microphone.
Yes, Chairwoman. In short, they keep substantial number of minority voters from being able to access the ballot. These laws that have been passed, the way they're being implemented, have a disproportionate impact on minority voters, and our litigation has shown that to be true. When, for example, Gwinnett County in Georgia aggressively rejected absentee ballots, it was disproportionately against minority voters. The exact match that Georgia implemented that did not allow for voter registration was disproportionately implemented against minority voters. So when these laws are passed, what they do is, in essence, keep minority voters from the ballot.
And also, Ms. Johnson-Blanco, proponents of new barriers to voting often claim that they are trying to stop, quote, voter fraud. Is this a legitimate explanation of these actions?
No, it isn't, because in essence what they're doing is keeping eligible voters from the ballot. In our Texas photo ID case, for example, our record showed that there were 600,000 registered voters who didn't have the restricted voter IDs that Texas required. So what is isolated instances of voter fraud cannot be used to keep thousands of legitimate voters from the ballot.
Thank you. And Reverend Barber, just like the poll taxes and literacy tests from 50 years ago, today's voter suppression tactics are race neutral on their face, but they disproportionately impact Black and brown communities. What do you believe is motivating the states that are aggressively pursuing efforts to limit the right to vote? Reverend Barber.
Well, sometimes they are, Charmaine.
Yes, Reverend Barber.
I'm getting to it. Sometimes they are, in fact, it's on. Sometimes they seem to be on their face, but the courts have said it's intentional. We were actually told not to try not to prove intentional racism, but we knew it was intentional, and we proved it in the court. We also know that the demographic shifts are driving this, because we know right now that if you register 2 to 10% of poor and low wealth people who are Black and brown and white in the South particularly, and you get 30% of unregistered Black voters to vote, you can fundamentally change all of the southern states. And we know the battleground is those 170 electoral votes that are in just 14 states in these United States. We also know that in our state, we saw a massive increase in voting after we won same-day registration and early voting. The first thing this unconstitutionally constituted legislature did was they went after same-day registration and early vote. I want this committee to hear this. They did not stop a program to extend the vote from being implemented. They took a program that voters had already used in 2 election cycles that was critical in 2008. They rolled back what citizens had actually used for 2 election cycles because of the fear of the fusion coalition of Black and brown and white people that can come together when we have access to the ballot.
Thank you. My time has expired. I'm grateful to all of the witnesses for your tireless work, your dedication to protecting the right to vote.